Alright, just finished Spanish Armada, written by Colin Martin and Jeffrey Parker in about 1989. Okay, and they go through it all the way from the controversy that led up to the war, the details of the war, and then afterward, and then also question 1988. The question, what would have happened had the Spanish been successful in their attack? Okay, so between King Philip II and Queen Elizabeth, King Philip II had a realm over the Spanish territories, which wasn't just in Spain but also east of Britain. There's a little section there. Apparently, they're calling them like the Dutch Isles or the something around the Netherlands region that the Spanish also controlled. So kind of they had the west and east sides of Britain, and Queen Elizabeth pretty much just ruled over England, which did not include Scotland, which was neutral at the time, but she did control Ireland. So they had feuds, and one major player that really has been mentioned a few times has been Sir Francis Drake. Now he's kind of a key player, but he was just another person, a part of the whole controversy, because we're talking about thousands upon thousands of people who are involved in this war. But if you've watched any of the Pirates of the Caribbean, Sir Francis Drake is the very guy you would think of for reality on who was involved. He was in the Caribbean as a pirate. He was pretty much a pirate, but he was kind of like a pirate slash opportunist military guy as well. He knew when to take advantage of situations, and he took advantage of the Spanish. He didn't, not his own people, his own English people, but the Spanish. So the Spanish would have called him a pirate. The English would have called him a hero. Okay, that's how you look at it, pretty much. And yeah, it's like Captain Jack Sparrow in a way. It's really interesting to read his ventures. But it came to a boiling point. There were raids against each other: Spain against England, England against Spain, and then the religious aspects of it, where the Catholics were at feud with the Protestants, and I believe the Spanish were Protestants, and King Philip, they talked about in here, had this religious motivation, like God was behind him and was going to support him, even though his military commander said it was not a good idea in a lot of ways to make an attack. Okay, the wind, the weather, the kind of the British resistance. There were a lot of factors. Just how to coordinate something so massive. It was all a bad idea. And the military commanders disputed it, but he kept saying, "Well, things will turn out. God has our backs." And so they did set out with 130 ships that spanned 2 miles. All right, imagine that, the 130 spanning two. And these are massive. Like, they're holding like just short of 1,000 people each ship. The way it sounds, 1,000 Spanish. They talked about how the Spanish dressed on the ships and the fancy details that were going on. They didn't really have a uniform way of dressing. But they had to meet up with the Parma, the Spanish commander, Parma, in like the Netherlands, which is just east, the shortest distance between Britain and the mainland of Europe. They had to meet up with that commander, who had provided a few extra thousand, like maybe 15,000 extra troops. They sailed out and only pretty much focused on short on food, heavy on people, on fighting soldiers, ready to just land and beat down the British. But instead, there was a lot of miscommunication. Parma did not have the troops ready, so the Spanish fleet, the Armada, was forced to sit in the water waiting for Parma to gather up his troops, which would take a week. And in the meantime, the British were were pounding away at the Spanish, and they took on a different tactic too. The British focused on their cannons, whereas Spain focused on trying to get close to the ships and board. But the British never let the Spanish board a single ship, and the British stood back and just were firing. And they're saying that a lot of the shots were ineffective. It took a lot of shots for the British to really start doing damage to the Spanish. But what really broke up the Spanish didn't seem to be that phased. A few ships here and there got sunk out of 130. They didn't seem to get that phased, but they were definitely maneuvering around. They weren't able to shoot back quite as much because they didn't have the cannons like the British did. The Spanish were all set just to land on Britain and take it over. So that was interesting how that worked out. You know, that it really shows the precursors to the firepower and the importance of it, standing back and shooting as opposed to trying to board. So the British, what really changed the course of the Spanish Armada, though, was when they were sitting there waiting for Parma, and after a couple of days waiting for them, the British sent out fire ships on fire, full of ammunition and stuff that would pop and explode and really scare the Spanish. And I think it sounds like they only sent out 6 ships. But and Spanish did send out some guide ships to catch whatever the British tried to do. They caught 2 of these fire ships with great bravery, because it's not easy to stop a ship on fire. But the others started heading right towards the Spanish group. They grouped tight together and anchored and just waited. Were waiting on Parma. But they saw the British, it was late at night, they saw this fire ships coming at them, and they had little time to move. So they had, some of the commanders panicked and cut the lines to their anchors. That way they had no more anchors. They didn't even have enough time to pull up the anchors. Maybe it takes hours to pull up the anchor or something. So they cut the lines instead to save time and move out of the way of the fire ships. That really put the Spanish at a big disadvantage, because they couldn't sit in one spot anymore. They had no anchors. Most of them didn't. So then they decided to start moving north around Britain because that's the way the winds were blowing. They had to move with the winds as best they could. And that's when a lot of wrecks started happening as they were rounding Ireland. They were trying to keep their distance from Ireland, but not too far away. But the winds, the weather pushed them up against Ireland, and there were 20 or 30 wrecks just lining Ireland as one by one Spanish ships were crashing into the Irish coast and just breaking up into nothing, and thousands upon thousands of men were just dying, drowning. They were already starving because they weren't set to be living off of the ships for very long. They were going to eat and dine on Britain instead at Britain's expense, as they were taking over the British islands. And Irish people supported Europe, or Britain, I mean. So the Irish are actually slaughtering these Spanish. All right, as soon as the Spanish landed, they were stripping the Spanish of their clothes and their weapons, and then just slaughtering them all along the coast. It was amazing. Some Spanish survived, some Spanish escaped, some Spanish were hired to help with a feud between one king and another king on the Irish islands. So one Irish king hired some of the Spanish soldiers to fight another family or something. I thought that was amusing, but thousands upon thousands were just slaughtered. Okay, and the few that made it back is out of 130 ships, 60 returned, and those that returned were not in good shape, the way it sounded. They never said a single one came back in immaculate shape. They were all beaten up. Okay, they all got shot by the British. So the weather was a big factor, and just the British tactics as well to keep the Spanish moving along as well with the fire ships. They said the fire ships was their best investment. Okay, there's a lot to this, but I don't need to spend any more time here.